Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
It's coming up to midday here. There's Big Ben behind us, looking wonderful, still working too. Maybe not for long if you read the papers. Prime Minister's Questions is on its way in a couple of minutes. James Landale is already here. James, what will Mr. Corbyn, do you think, zoom in on this PMQs?
I'll be amazed if he doesn't go on tax credits again. I'll be astounded. I mean, it is such...
It's an open goal.
It's an open goal. It's fruitful territory. And Labour thinks there are lots of questions still to be asked, because effectively what the Chancellor has done now is he said, right, I'm not going to tell you anything until the autumn statement to the end of next month. Therefore, there's now a month in which Labour can put pressure, ask questions, seek reassurances, you know, about how this decision is going to be made, what kind of accommodation to lessen the impact of these tax credit cuts. So that's the sort of territory I imagine he'll be in.
Are people speculating that Mr. Cameron's decided to talk about the Norwegian option today to get a story running that he's now party pre in this referendum? He's already taking sides. He's ruling out things he said he wouldn't rule out in order to try and get the flack away from tax credits.
No, I think it's a broader position from the government. I think it's a reflection of Number 10's doubts about the efficacy of the in campaign and the fact that they want to get some debates rolling.
They're getting a bit worried.
Secondly, I think they want to get the out debate focused where they want it, namely, what happens if the UK leaves the EU? What happens then? The doubt, the risk, the uncertainty. So the government will be very happy to spend the next year and a half, whatever it is, talking about Norway, Switzerland, any kind of, you know, complicated mixture of EEAs, EFTAs, you name it, as long as the debate's in that territory. Whereas the out campaign, when it ought to be about cost and control. And so that's the attempt. That's what the Number 10 are trying to do here.
It does mean the Prime Minister, though, kind of steps off the fence, doesn't it? Even before we have any idea what his renegotiation is going to achieve, he is arguing we shouldn't take this option, we shouldn't take this option. It is
the existing Prime Minister's position, the Prime Minister's existing position, that he wants to remain in the EU that is reformed. So I think it is a recognition of not putting all his eggs in one basket called renegotiation. He can't just go to the people and say, look, we've got a small tweak to the benefit rules, we've got a small change of language on ever closer union. He's actually also got to make a broader argument about why he generally, in principle, from a broad point of view, believes there is a positive reason to be a member of the EU. And
I take it from what you said that they are worried that the out campaign is gaining some ground, that the in campaign is kind of didn't quite take off?
Yes, I think the launch the other day was not seen in Tory circles as being a great success. I think they feel they have to get out there and make that argument too. I think there are members of the out campaign who have, should we say, personal relations with Number 10 that have not always been favourable and get under the skin of some people in Number 10. So I think there's just a sense of wanting to push back a little bit against the out campaign.
Who could you be talking about?
And is Mr. Corbyn is he continuing to crowdsource his questions?
Who knows? Who knows? We're getting mixed briefing about
John's smiling.
We might. Well, last week his office felt that it worked rather effectively to use a punter question to introduce the subject and then allow him to follow up, depending on what Mr. Cameron says. That seemed to be more effective.
It was a bit more effective in trying to pin the Prime Minister down.
You have a follow-up, don't you?
Is that what he's going to do?
Well, I don't know what he's going to do, but I think it's an effective tactic in PMQs because it's very difficult for the Prime Minister to get sort of nasty and sort of lose his temper, as he can do sometimes, if you're asking a question on behalf of somebody who was affected by these tax credit cuts.
It's the follow-ups people want to hear, though, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think Jeremy did follow up well. And actually, through the questioning last week, you know, we got the Prime Minister to say that he was delighted by the tax credit cuts. I mean, what an own goal on behalf of the Prime Minister. I bet he was kicking himself after that.
Let's go straight over to the Commons for Prime Minister's Questions.
Number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister!
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before answering my honourable friend, I know the whole House will wish to join me in paying tribute to Michael Meacher. He died suddenly last week, and we send our condolences to his family and friends. Michael dedicated his life to public service, diligently representing his Oldham constituents in this place for a staggering 45 years. He was a passionate advocate of the causes he believed in. These included the environment, and he was able to put these into practice as a minister between 1997 and 2003. This House and our politics are a poorer place without him, and I know that colleagues from all sides of this chamber will remember him with affection and miss him greatly. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, and in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I start by associating myself with the remarks the Prime Minister just made about Michael Meacher? And on behalf of the Labour Party, his constituents and a much wider community, our condolences to his family. I spoke to them last night and asked them how they would like Michael to be remembered. So they thought about it and sent me a very nice message, which, if I may, Mr. Speaker, I'll read out. It's quite brief, but it's very poignant. And this is what they said as memories of Michael. When I was young, one of the things he frequently said to me was that people went into politics because they had principles and wanted to change things to make the world better, but that in order to get into power, they would often compromise on their principles, and that this could happen again and again until, if they eventually did get into power, they would have become so compromised that they would do nothing with it. Those of us that knew Michael knew him as a decent, hard-working, passionate and profound man. He represented his constituency with diligence and distinction for 45 years. He was a brilliant Environment Minister, as the Prime Minister's pointed out. He was totally committed to parliamentary democracy and at this Parliament holding government, all governments, to account. And he was a lifelong campaigner against injustice and poverty. We remember Michael for all of those things. We express our condolences. We express our sympathies to his family at this very difficult time. His will be a hard act to follow, but we'll do our best. Mr. Speaker, following the events in the other place on Monday evening and the rather belated acceptance from the Prime Minister of the result there, can he now guarantee to the House and to the wider country that nobody will be worse off next year as a result of cuts to working tax credits?
What I can guarantee is that we remain committed to the vision of a high-pay, low-tax, lower welfare economy. And we believe the way to make sure that everyone is better off is keep growing our economy, keep inflation low, keep cutting people's taxes, and introduce the national living wage. As for our changes, the Chancellor will set them out in the autumn statement.
I thank the Prime Minister for that, but the question I was asking was quite simply this. Will he confirm right now that tax credit cuts will not make anyone worse off in April next year?
Prime Minister. What we want is for people to be better off because we're cutting their taxes and increasing their pay. But he's going to have to be a little patient because although these changes pass the House of Commons 5 times with ever-enlarging majorities, we will set out our new proposals in the autumn statement and he'll be able to study them.
Mr. Speaker, this is the time when we ask questions to the Prime Minister on behalf of the people of this country. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, if I may continue. People are very worried about what's going to happen to them next April. So what exactly does the Prime Minister mean? He's considering it. There's an autumn statement coming up. But we thought he was committed to not cutting tax credits. Is he going to cut tax credits or not? Are people going to be worse off or not in April next year? He must know the answer.
I'll make 2 points. First of all, we set out in our election manifesto we were going to find £12 billion of savings on welfare. And this is...
Order, there's too much noise in the chamber. Order! A bit of calm. The questions must be heard and the answers must be heard. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it's an important point because, of course, every penny we don't save on welfare is savings we have to find in the education budget or in the policing budget or in the health budget. The second point that I would make is, because of what's happened in the other place, of course we should have a debate about how to reform welfare and how to reduce the cost of welfare. Now, I'm happy to have that debate, but of course it is difficult to have that debate with the honourable gentleman because he has opposed every single welfare change that's been made. He doesn't support the welfare cap. He doesn't support the cap on housing benefit. He doesn't think that any change to welfare is worthwhile. And I have to say, if we want a strong economy and we want growth and we want to get rid of our deficit and we want to secure our country, we need to reform welfare.
What we're talking about are tax credits for people in work. The Prime Minister knows that, he understands that. He's lost the support of many people in this country that are actually quite sympathetic to his political project. Some of the newspapers who support him have now come out against him on this. He did commit to 12 billion cuts in the welfare budget, but repeatedly refused to say whether tax credits were going to be part of this. In fact, he said they weren't. Can he now give us the answer we're trying to get today?
The answer will be set out in the autumn statement when we set out our proposals. But I have to say to him, it has come to quite a strange set of events. When you have the House of Commons voting for something 5 times, when there is absolutely no rebellion amongst Conservative members of Parliament or indeed amongst Conservative peers, and the Labour Party is left defending and depending on unelected peers in the House of Lords. In British politics, we've got a new alliance, the unelected and the unelectable.
Mr. Speaker, it's very interesting that the Prime Minister still refuses to answer the fundamental question. This is not a constitutional crisis. This is a crisis for 3 million families in this country, for 3 million families who are very worried about what's going to happen next April. Just before the last election, the former Chief Whip, now Justice Secretary, said in answer to a question on the BBC World at 1, "Are you going to cut tax credits?" The answer was, "We are not going to cut them." Why did he say that?
But what I said in the election is that the basic level of child tax credits would stay the same, and at £2,780 per child, it stays exactly the same. But the point is this: if we want to get our deficit down, if we want to secure our economy, if we want to keep on with secure growth, we need to make savings in welfare. Now, if he, even with his deficit-denying, borrow forever plan, presumably he has to make some savings in public spending. If you don't save any money on welfare, you end up cutting the NHS. You end up cutting even more deeply policing budgets. Those are the truths. When is he going to stop his deficit denial, get off the fence and tell us what he'd do?
Mr. Speaker,
a moment ago that the answers needed to be heard, the questions need to be heard. The right honourable gentleman is going to ask his question. It will be heard. If it takes longer, so be it. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've 5 times asked the Prime Minister today whether or not people will be worse off if they receive working tax credits next April. He's still not been able to answer me or indeed many others. Can I put to him a question I was sent by... Mr. Speaker, it might be very amusing to members opposite, but I was sent this question by Karen, and I quote, "Why is the Prime Minister punishing working families? I work full-time and earn the living wage within the public sector. The tax credit cuts will push me and my family into hardship. Can he give a cast-iron guarantee to Karen and all the other families who are very worried what is going to happen next April to their income, how they're going to make ends meet. He could give them the answer today. I hope he will. I ask him for the 6th time, please give us an answer to a very straightforward, very simple question.
What I'd say to Karen is this: if she is on the living wage working in the public sector, next year, in April, she will benefit from being able to earn £11,000 before she pays any income tax at all. Right. It was around £6,000 when I became Prime Minister. If she has children, she will benefit from 30 hours of childcare every week. That is something that has happened under this government. But above all, she will benefit because we've got a growing economy, because we've got zero inflation, because we've got 2 million more people in work, because we're going to train 3 million apprentices in this Parliament. And that is the fact. The reason the Labour Party lost the last election is they were completely untrusted on the deficit, on debt and on a stable economy. And since then, the deficit deniers have taken over the Labour Party. That is what happened. And when you look at their plans, borrowing forever, printing money, hiking up taxes, it is working people like Karen that would pay the price.
Mr. Angus Robertson.
Much, Mr. Speaker. We on these benches associate ourselves with the condolences that have already been expressed by the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition about Michael Meacher. Last week I asked the Prime Minister about the tragic circumstances of Michael Sullivan, a man from North London, a disabled man who took his own life after an assessment by the Department of Work and Pensions. We know that at least 60 investigations have taken place into suicides following the cancellation of benefits, but the findings of them have not been published. Now, the Prime Minister said to me last week that he would look very carefully at the specific question about publication. Will the Prime Minister confirm when those findings will be published?
Well, I will write to him about this, but my memory from looking into his question afterwards is there are very good reasons why we can't publish the specific report that he talks about, because it has personal and medical data in it which would not be appropriate for publication. If I've got that wrong, I'll write to him, but that is my clear memory of looking into his question after last week.
Mr. Angus Robertson.
Thank you very much. Tim Salter from Stourbridge in the West Midlands was 53 when he took his life. The coroner ruled that a major factor in his death was that his state benefits had been, and I quote, greatly reduced, leaving him almost destitute. Tim's sister said, it's the vulnerable people who are going to be affected the worst. The DWP need to publish these reviews. The Prime Minister says that he is concerned about the views of the families involved. The families say the findings should be published. Will he publish the findings? 3 million families are going to have their child tax credits cancelled. We need the answer to these questions.
Minister.
Well, first of all, let me just correct him on his last point. Under the proposals we put forward, those people on the lowest levels of pay were protected because of the national living wage, and those people on the lowest incomes were protected because we were protecting the basic award of the child tax credit at £2,780. I think the other part of the question is the bit I've already answered, which is my understanding, but I'll send him a letter if I've got it wrong, is there were too many personal and medical details for that to be published. And so I think that is an important consideration in deciding whether to publish something.
Mark Pawsey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask the Prime Minister about Ruby. Ruby is one of my youngest constituents. She is just 1 month old. Why should Ruby face the prospect of spending her entire working life paying off the debt that's been built up by this generation?
Could it be that you're joking with me and you don't really see you and me? Could it be that you're joking with me and you don't really see you with me?
I think Ruby, it's absolutely right to care about Ruby. When we became the government, £1 in £4 spent by the government was borrowed money. We had one of the biggest budget deficits anywhere in the world, and it's always easy for people to say, put off the difficult decisions, don't make any spending reductions, but what they're doing is burdening future generations with debt. And what I would say to the Labour front bench, that is not generosity, that is actually selfishness.
Hodgson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr.
We
Speaker.
all know about the...
I think the Honourable Lady must have misheard. An innocent error, but Mrs Sharon Hodgson.
Mr. Speaker. We all know about the Prime Minister's broken promise on tax credits, but will the final nail in the coffin of compassionate conservatism be hammered home if he were to scrap universal infant free school meals in the spending review, taking hot, healthy meals out of the mouths of innocent, blameless infant children? Will he guarantee now not to scrap universal infant free school meals so he doesn't go down in history as Dave the dinner snatcher?
I'm immensely proud that it was a government I led that introduced this policy. 13 years of a Labour government, did they ever do that? Do you remember the infant free school meals bill from the Labour Party? No. So I'm proud of what we've done and we'll be keeping it.
Kirsty Blackman.
Mr. Speaker, how dare anyone in this House earning £74,000 a year tell families that their combined income of £25,000 is too much and that they need to give some of it back to balance the economy? Mr. Speaker, did the Prime Minister refuse to put this in his manifesto because he knew he wouldn't be elected?
Let me remind the Honourable Lady about the situation we inherited. When I became Prime Minister, 9 out of 10 families were getting tax credits, including members of Parliament. That is how crazy the system we inherited. Now, we reduced that during the last Parliament, opposed, I have to say, of course, by Labour and the SNP, to 6 out of 10 families. Our proposals would take that down to 5 out of 10 families. But these are not proposals on their own. They're accompanied by a national living wage for the first time. They're accompanied by allowing people to earn £11,000 before paying tax for the first time. Those sorts of measures will help the sort of family that she talks about.
Mr Ian Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Redundant steel workers, such as those at Caparo Wire in Wrexham, pay national insurance contributions and play by the rules. Why then is this government limiting mortgage interest support for them in the future and making them pay twice, once through national insurance and once through paying back a loan? Isn't that the type of action that an irresponsible government like his should not be pursuing, and isn't it an example of compassionate conservatism dying?
Well, actually, what the honourable gentleman refers to is a temporary recession measure on mortgage payments that was actually continued for 5 years. But he does give me the opportunity to say, as I promised I would last night, to update the House on what we're doing to help the steel industry that I know is important to his constituency. And on energy costs, I can announce today that we'll refund the energy-intensive industries for the full amount of the policy costs they face as soon as we get the state aid judgment from Brussels. And I can confirm that payment will be made immediately, and that payment will be made throughout this Parliament, far more generous than what has been proposed by the party opposite.
Graham Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've had hundreds of emails from constituents regarding the Northern Powerhouse, and I've just chosen one. John from Weaver Vale emailed me to tell me to not listen to the Leader of the Opposition with his strategy of higher spending, higher borrowing, more debt, but instead to stick to our long-term economic plan. For a higher wage, lower welfare, low-tax society. Does the Prime Minister agree with John from Weaver Vale?
Well, I do agree. John of Weaver Vale has demonstrated more sense in his email than the Leader of the Opposition did in at least 6 questions. And the point I'd make is not only have we seen an economy that is growing, 2 million more people in work, inflation that is low, and so living standards are rising, but actually we can see there are 680,000 fewer workless households and 480,000 fewer children in workless households. If you want to measure the real difference that the growth in our economy is making, think of those children, think of those households, and think of the dignity of work.
Mark Durkan.
Mr. Speaker, last weekend was the first anniversary of the death from cervical cancer of Derry girl Saoirse Glenn, aged 23. In June 2013, she had been concerned enough to ask for an early smear test, but was refused because she was under 25. As Team Saoirse and highlighting other life cases, her family have now written an open letter to the Prime Minister. Can I ask him not to offer here a reflex repeat of the rationale for current screening age policy, but to reflect on the questions raised about how this translates into refusing smear tests to young women like Saoirse, and to consider the age-related data since the screening age was increased in 2004.
No, well, the honourable gentleman raises an absolutely tragic case, and our thoughts go to her family and her friends. And he raises an important case because, of course, the UK National Screening Committee set the age at 25. And my understanding is the reason for that is not a resources-based decision. It's because of the potential perverse medical consequences of carrying out screening routinely below that age, that there would be a number potentially of false positives because of actually anatomical changes that go on at that age. That's the reason. It's not a resources decision. But as he says, it is worth looking at those people who fear they have a family history and ask for a test, and I'll certainly write to him on that specific issue.
Tim Farron! Mr. Speaker, could I associate myself with the Prime Minister's earlier remarks about the late Michael Meacher, who is a decent man, a good constituency MP and an extremely effective Environment Secretary. Yesterday I visited the refugee camps on Lesbos, and there I met families that were inspirational and desperate. Alongside with the British charity workers that I found there, I am frankly ashamed that we will not offer a home to a single one of those refugee families. So may I ask the Prime Minister this question? Will he agree with the Save the Children plea that we take as a country 3,000 vulnerable, unaccompanied children in Europe, some of whom are as young as 6?
Well, first of all, let me again welcome the honourable gentleman to his place. It's good to see such a high turnout of his MPs. Let me answer him very directly. We have taken the decision as a country to take 20,000 refugees, and we think it is better to take them from the camps instead of taking them from inside Europe. I repeat again today that we believe we will achieve 1,000 refugees brought to Britain and housed and clothed and fed before Christmas. Now, specifically on his question about the 3,000 children and the proposal made by Save the Children, I've looked at this very carefully. There are other NGOs and experts who point to the very real danger of separating children from their broader families, and that's why to date we haven't taken that decision.
Mr. Christopher Pincher.
His negotiations on our reformed relationship with the European Union in earnest. Will my right honourable friend confirm to our partners and the British people that no option is off the table? All British options will be considered, including the option of a relationship such as that of Norway, if it's negotiable and in our interest.
Now, yes. I can certainly confirm to my honourable friend that no options are off the table, and as I've been clear, if we don't get what we need in our renegotiation, I rule absolutely nothing out. But I do think it's important, as we have this debate as a nation, that we're very clear about the facts and figures about the alternatives. As some people arguing for Britain to leave the European Union, not all people, but some people, have particularly pointed to the position of Norway, saying that is a good outcome. I would guide very strongly against that. Norway actually pays as much per head to the EU as we do. They actually take twice as many per head migrants as we do in this country, but of course they have no seat at the table, no ability to negotiate. Now, I'm not arguing that all those who want to leave the EU say they want to follow the Norwegian path, but some do, and I think it's very important in this debate we absolutely are clear about the consequences of these different actions.
Prime Minister, join me in congratulating my 17-year-old constituent, Jessie McCabe, on her 3,800 name e-petition that's managed to get the exam board Edexcel for the first time ever to accept women composers on the syllabus. And while he's there, would he tell us, is he a feminist?
If feminism means that we should treat people equally, then yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm proud of the fact that I've got sitting around the cabinet table a third women sitting around the cabinet table, something we promised and something that we delivered. Yeah. But can I congratulate her, above all, can I congratulate her for her achievement in terms of this e-petition? It sounds thoroughly worthwhile, and her constituent and her have done a good job.
Mary Cray.
Speaker, the Prime Minister will remember meeting my constituents Neil Shepherd and Sharon Wood. 9 years ago this week, Neil took their two children, Christy aged 7 and Bobby aged 6, on holiday to Corfu, and the children tragically died of carbon monoxide poisoning. The family's dearest wish is that no other family suffers the heartbreak and tragedy that they have endured. Tomorrow in the European Parliament, there will be a vote on a recommendation that the Commission brings forwards legislation to improve carbon monoxide safety and fire safety for tourism premises in the EU. Can I ask the Prime Minister that his MEPs support it? And if that motion falls, will he look at instigating legislation nationally in this country?
Well, first of all, I well remember the meeting that we had and the great bravery of the parents after their terrible loss, wanting to go on and campaign to make sure that others didn't lose children in the way that they had. I'll look very carefully at what she's saying about the European Parliament. As for legislation in this country, we do have very strict legislation on particular things about fire-resistant materials, but I'll look carefully at that too.
Question 14, closed question. Mr Michael Fabricant.
And 14, sir.
Prime Minister.
The Chancellor and I set out an ambitious long-term plan for the Midlands, making its future engine for growth for the whole of the UK. Across government, we're actively working with business leaders and local authorities to progress this ambition.
Ian Austin.
Mr Speaker, can I tell the Prime Minister and the Chancellor that there's strong support, all the parties, the LEPs, business, local authorities, right across the West Midlands, for a properly funded and significant devolution deal to strengthen the economy, to boost productivity, to get the brownfield sites redeveloped, to tackle congestion, so that we can transform the West Midlands with more jobs, better skills, quicker transport links and new homes.
Well, I'm very glad to hear from the honourable gentleman what an opportunity there is in the West Midlands to work across party to get the very best deal across all these authorities, because, as I said, the more we can get the local authorities to come together and work together and put their ambition and vision on the table, even the better response they'll get from the government.
Simon Burns.
Does my right honourable friend agree with me that bullying in the workplace is reprehensible?
Oh, indeed.
Can he tell me whether the government is planning any review of the legislation with a view to extending it to this chamber?
Prime Minister.
Given that my honourable friend's been called for a Prime Minister's questions at 12:38, I would have thought any hint of bullying was clearly over in this House. In any conceivable way, he suffers no disadvantage, and I think that is a very good thing. But I mustn't make like bullying in the workplace is a problem. I think we do need to make sure it is stamped out and dealt with wherever it occurs, and that should apply in Parliament as elsewhere.
Order. Urgent question.
Well, it is almost 20 minutes to 1. Question time now, regularly finishing well after 12:30.
Started late.
Started late today as well. The Speaker didn't begin it till 2 minutes after 12, but it still lasted for almost 38 minutes, 37 minutes. Jeremy Corbyn today, many people saying he had his strongest performance yet at PMQs. He's not done many, but people thinking this was his best outing so far. He got away from crowdsourcing his questions until the very last one, but it was on the same theme, the final one, as the other 5, which was on tax credits, and particularly on the issue is, will anybody lose out on the tax credit changes? And that's what the question that Mr Corbyn asked the Prime Minister again and again, and it was quite clear that the Prime Minister would only answer in the general and not answer the specific question about who would lose out. Angus Robertson for the Scottish Nationalists asked about a link between those who have ruled that they're not eligible for welfare and then subsequently have found to commit suicide. He asked that question last week. He came back with 2 again this week. And then we saw Tim Farron asking questions about migrants after his trip to one of the Greek islands where he saw them. We'll find out what our panel thought in a minute, but first let's find out what you thought. Jojo.
Yes, Christopher Bowring from Berkshire says, however passionate Jeremy Corbyn may feel about tax credits, does it show a singular lack of imagination to ask the same question 6 times? But Ian Whiteley says Jeremy Corbyn using the same effective tactic as Michael Howard did as Tory leader, asking the same question 6 times, makes the Prime Minister look dodgy when he avoids answering a very simple and straightforward question, especially when so many are affected. Nigel Wade in Essex says David Cameron is very good at political ranting and dispatch box propaganda, but hopeless at answering a simple question on tax credits. And Tim Bass from Norwich says politically this is the most important and exciting time in a generation. Didn't feel that reflected by a question from Karen. So many issues are coming to a head. The Lords, the EU, Scotland and maybe even electoral reform. As for tax credits, I wish someone would make the argument the changes are designed to change behaviour rather than play the system.
OK, thanks for that. James, we've got in the last Wednesday of November not just the autumn statement, but the comprehensive spending review. It lays out the plans of government spending over the next 3 financial years. There must be a great danger for George Osborne now that this substantial statement, as important as the budget in many ways, is now going to be entirely hijacked by his need to change tax credits.
He will do everything possible to make sure that it's not. But clearly, it will be. It is now going to be the dominant theme running up until that moment.
Long time too.
And the problem they've got is that there is now a gap for Labour to say what they're going to say, which we saw, from the leader of the opposition this morning. Clearly learning. As he does all these Prime Minister's questions, realising that it's effective to ask the same question 6 times because it illustrates the lack of an answer, sticking on one issue, allowing himself a little bit of freedom to make his own point. I also thought what was interesting, though, from the Prime Minister is he's clearly now trying to develop a bit of a defence, which is not just sort of rabbit in the headlights. It's actually saying, no, look, if these are choices, if you actually don't make these cuts to welfare, then if you stick to these spending plans as is, you have to find the money elsewhere. You have to find from health, education, he said, and went through that list. And I think that's something that I think the Tories and the government want to try and develop that as much as they can, so they can say it is a choice. This is not just a sort of free hit on, do you want to hurt working people or not? There are broader, budgetary implications for this.
Is the Chancellor left only with the option to tweak, to kind of take away some of the rough edges, to ameliorate what is going to happen? Or does he have time to do something more radical? There's been a lot of talk from the Adam Smith Institute to the Institute for Economic Affairs, even from NISA, from the National Institute for Economic and Social Research, about moving to a negative income tax. That a negative income tax would be simpler, fairer, and concentrate the money on the working poor. Is it too late for a fundamental change like that?
I would be surprised if he goes down that route. People in Treasury that I speak to, they're pretty sure they know what they're going to do. They're just not telling us yet.
I see.
And I think there's enough flexibility already built in the system to reduce the surplus target, extend the surplus target, come up with another form of mitigation elsewhere in terms of maybe looking at the national, the NICS thresholds. Can you change those in relation to income tax thresholds? Very expensive. Yeah, none of these things are cheap, and that is the point that they're going to make. What I find really interesting is the point you make about this is we're not just talking about tax credits. We're talking about an extraordinary spending review that's coming up, and I'm curious to see how the government goes into that, making the broader argument for saying, look, they've done 5 years of low-hanging fruit. The spending cuts that are coming now are going to be tough. They're going to bite. How do they get into that argument of making that defence, of saying, look, in the Conservative viewpoint, you have to make those cuts to secure the economic future? At the moment, there's still a certain amount of uncertainty about whether to go for that argument in a full-throated way, or whether you're still in an argument saying, well, no, the cuts aren't as bad because we're going to compensate for X, Y and Z. And there's sometimes you hear different voices from different Conservatives.
The Prime Minister was asked 6 times if anybody would lose out from the tax credit changes. And 6 times he didn't answer that specific question. Why not?
Well, I think it comes back to the conversation we had prior to
question time itself, which is that it is not a simple, straightforward situation. You have got to look at the wider picture. There are choices to be made, and it's about how we change the type of economy we want to have. So it is not a straightforward situation. We've got to deal with that sort of complicated, difficult decision about changing the economy, and actually, picking up on Joe's point, actually changing how we look at welfare. I mean, that lower welfare economy with lower taxes and higher wages, and that gets us into a much stronger economic position in the medium term and the long term as well.
The email that Joe read out there about behavioural change, that it's designed to provoke a behavioural change, is there something in that? If you look at some of the figures where quite clearly people would lose out, if they worked a couple of extra, and quite often it affects part-time workers, if they worked a couple of extra hours on the new higher national minimum wage, that would compensate quite substantially for the withdrawal of tax credits. Is there something in that? Is there a behavioural issue here?
The problem is it depends on your individual circumstances. So if you're a single earner on 15,000, if you do get a few extra hours, for every extra pound that you earn, you're then losing, I think it's about 70 pence in your tax credit. So actually, it's not compensating for the hit. You're still losing out. And I think
if you're a parent, though, you would get more hours of free childcare. I mean, these are just the arguments that have been put forward.
Yeah, but some of the, I think that's a fair point. But my understanding from some of the analysis is there's only about 10% of tax credit recipients are going to benefit from this expansion in childcare. I mean, the problem is, and it's a bit like the question you put to me very reasonably, George Osborne has now got a problem because in law, because of his fiscal charter, he's got to hit a surplus in 2019. He's also got to find about 7 to 10 billions worth of tax cuts, which the Tory party promised at the last election, which hasn't been scored in to the budget, into the recent Red Book. And he's got to make a decision. Is he going to compensate everybody who's losing out? You know, that is a loss of, as you said, $4.5 billion. Or is he going to sort of phase it in? Or, you know, I don't think he does know what he wants to do. And I don't think he can give a guarantee that there'll be no losers. So whatever he does, people are going to lose out, I think.
I mean, the blunt truth, surely, is that the Prime Minister didn't answer the question because people are going to lose out. We may not be exactly clear how many or by how much, but there will be losers. But it would seem to me the Chancellor's playing a longer game here because he knows there's going to be losers. They've done the sums, but because of what he hopes will be behavioural changes, that it will be worthwhile people working more, doing more hours, they'll get the national living wage, they'll come off an element of tax credits, that by 2020 it'll all be over, that we won't be arguing about this by then, even though there were short-term losers.
That is clearly his strategy. I think where there are some people in the government who think that they've got it, some of the short-term tactics wrong, is they've got the timings wrong within that 5-year period, and that what's happened is that some of the cuts are front-loaded and some of the compensatory elements come in too far down the line. It's very, very hard to argue when someone's tax credits are going to be removed next April to say, well, there's going to be a ripple effect and things. It's a very hard argument to make, and I think that is where I think people say the government should change the timing but stick to the argument.
And that's where the Tory nerves are coming.
That's where the nerves are coming in.
Okay, we'll leave it there. James, thank you very much.
I've been getting away with it all